iLearn's session on with Dr. John Falk of the Institute for Learning Innovation. Um, Dr. Falk is one of the luminaries in informal learning around the world, doing work with museums, libraries, galleries, and archives. We're proud to host his featured session here today, and we're really excited that John and the Institute for Learning Innovation has a number of projects and partnerships activities with iLearn. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John. Thank you, John, so much for presenting, and it's all yours.
Hey, you're welcome. Try not to fall off the stage here. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here and talking to this group, and particularly talking about um, the nature of learning in places like galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And as you can see, this is a very appropriate topic for me. I live this reality that the technology may be new, but the user's operating system is old. So although there's new and exciting technologies that come along every year, multiple ones every year, pushing the boundaries of when and where and how we can communicate with audiences of all kinds, including and particularly in places like galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. The value of these technologies depends upon not only their functionality as technologies, but equally, if not more importantly, how well they interact with humanity's basic operating system, i.e., the human brain. And although we're capable of adapting to lots of new things, basic structure and functioning of the brain has not fundamentally changed in more than 50,000 years. So let's talk about some basic fundamentals. Um, Humans, as I'll discuss, like all living creatures, um, evolved to make choices, and those choices are determined by enhanced well-being. Um, and I'll talk about that, more about what I mean by well-being. Um, we're hardwired to believe that things that and deliver well-being are meaningful. Emotion is a critical mental gatekeeper, determining what is or is not um, salient and meaningful. Um, Meaningful things are remembered, and I tend to think of learning and memory as two sides of the same coin. And these memories, our prior knowledge, our prior experience, um, dictate our future choices, including the choices we make to learn where and when and how and with whom. And that's just an overview. So let's dive into this a little bit. And I hit the wrong button here. Okay. So it all starts with well-being. Um, and in my way of thinking, um, well-being, unlike it has traditionally been talked of late among particularly a lot of positive psychologists, talking about well-being as happiness and feeling good. That is an aspect of well-being, but well-being is far more fundamental. Well-being is about fitness. Um, and the bottom line is that living things that manage to maximize their positive well-being and minimize their negative well-being are more likely to survive and thrive. This is literally what Darwin was talking about when he was talking about natural selection. Now, um, historically, when biologists, um, and certainly over the last 50, 60 years, um, have talked about natural selection, they've disproportionately focused on genes. Um, And it implies that the implication is that it's almost like living things are machines pre-programmed to do certain things, which are dictated by our genetics. But the truth is, every living thing, certainly including humans, um, are sentient organisms and capable of positively acting in the world and doing things to enhance their well-being. Um, Obviously, some of it is biological, but it's not all biological. So I have to see, talk about programming. I'm programmed to advance my PowerPoint by hitting one of these on my computer, the arrows. And every time I do that, I take a step back. So let's talk more about well-being. So as I said, the perception of well-being and the enhancement of well-being is not a uniquely human capability, but a fundamental process of life. Every living thing has this ability to a greater or less extent. Even the simplest bacterium are capable of influencing their lives. If they bump up against something that is nasty, they retreat. Uh, if they bump up against something that is tasty, um, they absorb it. Um, we avoid negative well-being. We try to avoid sickness. We try to avoid danger. If you get too close to an insect, it flies away or it plays dead. Or if it's a beetle, it might literally pull in its legs and drop off whatever leaf or branch it is. Um, that's an active um, effort to minimize negative well-being. But we also have evolved to act in ways that enhance our positive well-being, finding a mate, um, eating food in order to take in sustenance, drink when we're thirsty, and of course, learning is also one of those behaviors we do to enhance our well-being. Uh, Unfortunately, again, unlike has it has typically been portrayed in terms of well-being as something that you can attain, well-being is ephemeral. Particularly positive well-being is ephemeral. And thus, we spend all of our lives continually striving to find ways to maximize our positive well-being. And of course, at the same time, minimize our negative well-being. We avoid trying to do things that'll make us sick, and we try to do things that we think will make us happy. But as we all appreciate, happiness or wellness, those are ephemeral. So we constantly are working hard at this. So what does enhanced well-being look like, particularly for humans? Obviously, we're really complex creatures, um, and we've evolved over time many ways to strive to enhance or minimize, enhance positive well-being, minimize negative well-being. Um, but as I have researched this and um, discussed this, uh, we can subsume all these myriad ways into four basic types of well-being. So certainly the oldest, the most fundamental, evolving at the beginning of life itself, 3.8 billion years ago, and the most recent, i.e. sexual reproduction, evolving um, as best as we can tell about 2 billion years ago. We constantly are striving to enhance and maximize our physical well-being. Um, and people, like all living creatures, have basic needs. We have hunger, we have thirst, we rest, we need to feel secure and safe and healthy. Um, and yes, we have a desire for sex. And fulfilling these basic needs is not only satisfying, um, each of us spends a surprisingly large part of every day seeking this type of well-being in one form or another. I mean, on average, we spend a third or more of every day sleeping, resting. We spend a quarter of the day uh, eating or preparing foods. And some people spend a disproportionate amount of their time thinking about and seeking sex. Um, Although As a modern society, we tend not to spend a lot of time thinking about physical well-being. This is truly a really important and fundamental part of who we are. And that even when people go to places like galleries and libraries, archives and museums, um, consciously or more often unconsciously, they're there and concerned about their comfort, their security, their safety, and often they're there specifically to get away from the hassles of daily life, to feel a sense of restoration, peace, security. More recently evolving, arguably some 600 million years ago, although that was a long time ago, um, we're social creatures. And um, higher organisms, people like us, are inherently social creatures. And we spend, again, virtually all our lives in social relationships. And we derive extreme satisfaction from being part of those associations with others, whether those associations are with our family, with our friends, in meetings like this, or even in terms of larger groups, affiliations with sports teams or nationalities. Um, and then more recently evolving, again, with um, dawn of consciousness, uh, conscious awareness, perhaps as long ago as 16 million years ago, um, we spend a lot of time worrying about our social relationships and evolved to desire to love, to be respected, um, to have others respect us, and to show our appreciation for others. So it's not an accident that one of the tools we have in this iLearn is clapping. Um, that those kinds of show of appreciation are really, really important to the way we live. And again, we use our institutions like libraries and museums as places to um, exercise and facilitate those social relationships with families and friends. Even more recently evolved, um, certainly by 5 million years ago, but again, probably preceding that, um, great apes evolved the ability to push the limits of learning and the ability to have choice and control um, to further limits with the evolution of conscious awareness. And all people um, derive satisfaction from having a sense of choice and control over their world and their environment. And we seek to accomplish this by being curious about our settings, by trying to understand our world and use that understanding um, to predict and to a degree can influence current and future actions. Obviously, again, um, core value historically of places like galleries and libraries, archives and museums was they were tools for facilitating this kind of intellectual well-being. They were depositories of knowledge. They were places where we could learn more about ourselves and the world in which we live, and to take those lessons and project them outward, both into the past, to understand the past, as well as into the future, um, using conscious awareness. And pushing those capabilities even further, a very uniquely human capability is what I call personal well-being. And this is this whole sphere of activities that include creativity and spirituality. It's basically the using our ability of abstract reasoning um, to envision and project uh, reality in ways that we uh, cannot perceive concretely. It's why um, when a conscious higher ape like us looks in a mirror, um, we don't start pecking at it like a bird because we don't see a rival, or we don't ignore it as an insect would. But we sit there and study it because we realize that's an image of ourselves. And It is why we can invent virtual reality tools. Um, and needless to say, our wonder, our interest, our identity, um, building are all parts of this personal well-being. And we tend to overemphasize in psychology um, the importance of this realm of well-being, but we shouldn't underestimate it either. It's an important part of what it means to be human, and it's again an important outcome of the experiences people have in places like libraries and museums and archives. Um, so all of this comes down to this organ called the brain, and our brains are meaning-making machines. Then I have to stop and say, meaning making. So, what does it mean for something to be meaningful? Well, it turns out that things that are meaningful, lo and behold, are things that enhance our well being or not, as the case may be. Um, getting, if we eat a food that makes us sick, that's a very meaningful thing. And we pay attention to that because we don't want to do that again. If we get food poisoning, we remember what it was that gave us food poisoning, or try to remember. On the other hand, we also remember things that made us that we found attractive or beautiful. Um, those things also have a way of creating meaning. And things that we perceive as meaningful, enhancing our well-being, um, one way or another, um, we find salient, we find memorable. And we use those memories then, i.e., our past learning, what we know, what we've experienced in the past. We use that as a framework for making future meaning, i.e., what we will do in the future, our actions, our choices. And surprise, surprise, this is all very circular because those choices are there to support our future well being. One of the, in fact, the most ancient module of the vertebrate brain is the limbic system. And it is right there in the middle of your brain, and it's composed of parts like the hippocampus and the amygdala and the cingulate gyrus and the hypothalamus. And emotions are connected, these parts of the brain are connected to every single other part of the brain. Where every part of the brain, even the most distant parts, are connected, wired to the limbic system. And these emotions act as gatekeepers. They help us regulate all of our mental functions. Um, and they are tied, once again, to our perception of meaningfulness. Um, the more meaningful a situation is, um, uh, the more emotionally laden it is. Think of um, fear, if you think of joy, you think of disgust, if you think of anger, all these things, all these emotions are deeply connected to things that are important to us psychologically and biologically. Um, they are what are meaningful. And not only that, turns out, not surprisingly, that highly emotional content is more likely to be attended to and also remembered. And we use these memories, again, to influence our choices and behaviors. Um, knowledge, past experience, uh, are always tied to how we decide um, whether something in the future is to be is memorable or meaningful or not. And we prioritize our choices, including what we learn, based on how they align with our past experiences as well as our current perceptions of well-being related desires and needs. Um, did a whole line of research, and this research has now been substantiated in literally hundreds and hundreds of museums around the world, um, and dozens of studies that showed that people are making choices, often unconsciously, about whether to go to a library, whether to go to a museum, based on whether it fits their needs. Um, is this a place that will help me fulfill my social needs? Is this a good place to go with my children this weekend? Is this a place that will satisfy my curiosity? Is this a place that will tickle my curiosity and enhance the quality of my understanding? Um, those needs then are played out as people go to these settings, and we use these settings then to reinforce those needs, and actually that's what drives our agendas there. Um, and we make these choices, once again, um, in a way to actively facilitate our sense of well-being, i.e., hopefully our positive well-being, but also to avoid things that are negative. So just a few memory, and actually, since memory is the flip side of learning, these are also learning factoids. People best remember things um, that engender positive or negative well-being. Sound like a broken record here, but this is really important to remember. Um, that again, um, if you take away nothing from this talk, um, remember that people are basically motivated to do things that relate to their well-being, and their well-being, if you remember, is fitness. It's all about survival. I do these things consciously or unconsciously because in some way I perceive, um, or evolutionarily it has become correlated with, that doing these things will result in enhancing my success as a human being. Um, it will uh, enhance my social bonds, which will make me more secure. It'll enhance my knowledge and curiosity that I can use later to be successful in life. Um, all memories, as they go through that limbic system, through the hippocampus, um, have a time and a sort of an emotional stamp as well as a place stamp. And that's why if I ask you, um, can you remember the last time you were at a museum? It may have been a week ago. It may have been a year ago. It may have been years ago. But the answer is going to be yes. I remember going to a museum a year ago. And if I ask you to tell me about that, you'll not only remember what you did, but you'll remember the place. You'll remember who you were with. You'll remember aspects of the physical setting. Um, and all of that is because that's the way memories are encoded. Memory, like learning, is constructed. Memories aren't like the hard drives on our computer. Um, we distribute little bits and pieces of memory throughout various parts of our brain. And then when we recall things, we reassemble them. And that's why our memories can be faulty. It's why our memories can be influenced. Um, and long-term memories, the things that we lay down, like that memory of that museum experience a year ago or so, um, uh, are assembled not instantaneously, but over time. And up to this point, I've talked primarily about sort of the biological aspects of all this, but let's not forget that lived experience makes a huge difference as well. Um, we all are products of our culture, um, and our society, and those influence how we think about our language, our customs, our values. All of those thoughts and assumptions influence how we use and think about experiences we might have in a galleries or libraries or archives or museums. And every person's life history is unique. Um, We each are unique individuals because we've all had unique experiences. And thus, none of us access, process information, or react to experiences in exactly the same way. So let's think about how we use this information. So if we're going to create a technology that facilitates physical well-being, um, we have to think about things like safety and comfort. People like to know where they are and what they're about to encounter. And this is true whether we're in real spaces or in virtual reality. Um, People find it very stressful not to know uh, if they've perceived that there could be danger lurking around the corner. Um, and if that's the case, um, if situations are perceived as threatening, uh, all of our attention will be devoted to damping down that anxiety and that fear rather than attending to any of the information that we might think is great. Uh, many years ago, I did a series of studies of taking uh, urban children to nature centers and discovered that lo and behold, um, took these urban kids into the woods, teach them about ecology. They weren't interested in ecology. They were interested in surviving. They were interested in making sure that they weren't going to get eaten by lions and tigers and bears. But this wasn't just a function of being an urban kid. Um, when I took urban, when I took uh, rural kids uh, in a similar matched experiment and took them into inner city Washington, D.C., and tried to do an ecology lesson in a park in the middle of a busy intersection, these kids were worried about getting mugged. They were listening to sirens. They were worried about getting hit by cars. They too were not focusing on the events that were going on in that quote unquote ecology lesson. Um, so these kinds of things are really basic. And obviously, in this realm of physical well-being, design matters. Good design matters. Um, Design uh, that attends to uh, basic sort of micro physical needs of humans in terms of how we see and how we what we can do with our fingers and our thumbs and all those kinds of human dynamics. Facilitating social well-being. Uh, all too often, experiences, particularly technology experiences, have historically been designed for individuals as opposed to groups. But if you think of places like libraries and museums, there aren't very many people who go to those settings as individuals. They go in groups. And so our technologies that we create in these spaces have to accommodate um, not just one individual, but multiple individuals. Um, and people are there often for social reasons. So we need to create experiences um, that allow people to interact socially. And of course, people crave feedback and approval and positive reinforcement. Um, and as we learned a long time ago uh, by the behaviorists, that positive reinforcement gets you more than negative reinforcement. And so we need to create experiences that are positively reinforcing, which obviously game designers have also figured out. And groups in general, families in particular, um, are using settings like libraries and museums, often primarily for their own social purposes, as opposed to necessarily for the institutional, quote unquote, learning purposes that the institutions think they should be there for. And when it comes to, pardon my French, a pissing match between users' agenda and the institution's agenda, guess whose agenda is going to win every time? So if you're fighting that social agenda, for example, um, of the users of your institutions, the winners are going to be the users. They'll figure out how to do their social thing regardless of whether you make it easy or not. And the loser is going to be the institution. facilitating intellectual well-being. Um, Far and away, the most critical thing, though people, yes, are curious and they want to learn and they're open to moderately new experiences, people like to have choice and control. Um, This is why my colleagues and I prefer the word free choice learning to informal learning, because ultimately it's not about the setting that makes the difference. It's not whether it's formal or informal. It's not whether it's in a school or a museum. It's whether that setting affords people choice and control. Choice of what to learn, choice of obviously how to learn, choice of why to learn, choice of what to learn, and choice of with whom to learn. And as long as you afford people that amount of choice and control over their experience, they're going to be more inclined to use it in a positive way, the way that you'd like it to be used, to learn and to grow. But ironically, my research and that of others have shown that although people go to places like libraries and archives, and museums in particular, um, and galleries in order to expand their experience and see and learn new things, um, they're most likely use these settings to confirm what they already know. So they, as a colleague once said, what people learn in museums is what they sort of already know. So they will learn new things, but more often than not, they will extend their existing knowledge, which is learning too. Um, we've been preconditioned to believe that learning because of school is adding like blocks one on top of each other, learning new knowledge. But as Piaget understood many, many years ago, learning is equally, if not more importantly, the distribution of those blocks, sort of taking the blocks that you already have in your head and rearranging them in new ways to make more sense of the world. Uh, that is the majority of the way that we learn rather than adding new bits and pieces of knowledge. And then finally, uh, people love and are attracted to things they find unusual, beautiful, rare. Awe and wonder is a fascinating thing. Um, it's not a surprise that people are attracted to national parks and beautiful places. And whereas your basic mammal, a squirrel, a deer, um, will walk by a waterfall and sit there and maybe look up at what's making all the noise and then walk away, people will flock to that waterfall, sit on the edge, and just watch it. We'll sit and watch the waves. We love to look at things that inspire us, that are unusual, beautiful, awe, and wonder, and it gives us joy. Um, and we use our settings as well to build our identities, our sense of who we are, and to expand that sense. In fact, that is the primary reason we learn. We learn in order to build our identity. But identity building is a means to an end. It's not an end. And surprise, surprise, the end, we use our identity to support our well-being. People want to feel good about themselves and their experiences, and they actively cultivate being in situations that make them feel good about themselves. None of us like to do things or be in places that make us feel insecure or um, bad about ourselves. And so if we start using a technology that makes us feel bad about ourselves or makes us feel stupid, we're going to stop using that technology. But if it makes us feel good about ourselves, then we're going to be inclined to use it. So no matter the technology, people will mostly unconsciously um, ask, is this experience enhancing my well-being related needs? Is this technology satisfying my physical needs? Is it satisfying my social needs? Is it satisfying my intellectual needs? Is it satisfying my personal needs? Is it making me feel good about myself? And no matter the technology, user interactions will be driven by people's prior interests and experiences. What are the opportunity costs? Um, I love this technology, but if it's going to take me 3 days to figure out how to use it, maybe it's not worth it. It may be cool, but if it's not easy enough for me to easily use, then I might just pass on it. Um, is it does it bring me pleasure? Does it bring me pain? If it brings me pleasure, I'll keep using it. If I found it painful, I'm going to stop using it. Um, does it meet my social and physical affordances? Is it like this man here? If I have to stoop down in order to see what's in that case, I might do it for a while, but after a while, I'm going to say, hell with this. This is too much trouble. Um, I, I can't spend my life stooping down to try and see things that I can't see or to find facts or information that are difficult to access. And no matter the technology, users will judge their usefulness and value not based on the designer's um, lived experiences and cultural preferences, but on the user's lived experience and cultural preferences and experiences. So we have to be sympathetic and not antagonistic to the values, beliefs, and past experiences of people, of our users. And needless to say, those are very diverse. And it behooves us as we design technologies to try and get inside the shoes of all of the diverse users that we hope to aspire and inform, many of whom have come from very, very different cultural backgrounds, very, very different life experiences. Um, the single biggest reason many people do not use places like libraries and galleries um, and museums and archives is not because they think they're bad things or that there wouldn't be interesting things in there, but there's nothing in their past experience that suggests that these are places that will satisfy their needs. When they were children, these were not places they went to. They didn't grow up believing that these are wonderful places to go to. And the limited experiences they may have had, like, for example, on a school field trip, may not have been the most pleasant or reinforcing experience. So ultimately, the reason for not using them is not so much that they think they're couldn't in the abstract find useful things there. It's just when they wake up on a Saturday morning thinking, what are they going to do today? It never comes into their mind as a useful place to meet their needs, their social needs, their personal needs, their physical needs, or their intellectual needs. So, summarize, new technologies need to acknowledge and accommodate users' well-being related needs, all of their needs, not just their intellectual needs, not just wow and excitement needs, but equally their physical needs and their social needs. All those needs all the time. Designs need to accommodate the idiosyncrasies of human mental processing. Um, remember that we're dependent on past experiences, that we use those past experiences to decide, those memories to decide what was successful, what was unsuccessful, what was pleasant, what was unpleasant, what felt good, what didn't feel good, um, what gave us satisfaction, what didn't give us satisfaction. Um, and all of these are emotionally laden. Um, one of the big breakthroughs in neuroscience over the last couple decades was the appreciation is that this notion of the rational human being, that the Cartesian model of the world, um, was absolute nonsense. All of us all of us need emotion and use emotion when thinking, when problem solving, when learning. And all of us have a desire for moderate novelty. Moderate novelty uh, feels really good. Too little novelty and too much novelty feel really bad. And we avoid that at all costs. This is one of those U-shaped functions um, that things that are boring, we avoid. Things that are too jarring, we also avoid. So we're constantly seeking things that are interesting, that are different, but only moderately different, only moderately interesting is the key. And of course, it's a psychological novelty is one of those things that everybody's novelty is different. This platform and this experience for me is highly novel. For some of you, this may be like falling off a log. Um, Same experience, um, but I've never given a talk before as an avatar, so this was a really highly novel experience for me. And ultimately, designs need to respect and accommodate each user's unique lived experience, which is sort of where I was going a second ago. Um, and we all have different lived experience, and we all need to, uh, as we design experiences, accommodate those. So that's just of what I have to share today. I want to thank you all for listening to this, and we have time for about 15 minutes for questions. If somebody has any questions, um, I will be happy to take those questions now.
Any questions? Thank you so much, John. That was fantastic. I have a bunch of questions, but I do too much talking. Let's we see some people typing in the chat.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm really curious to find out what what experiences have you had in helping museums and others to curate exhibits based on these complex fundamental human needs?
Sure. Well, the first, uh, in recent years, what I've been focused on are these sort of identity or well-being related needs. And so there are a number of institutions that have tried to, for example, um, structure their experiences in ways uh, that accommodate multiple needs. So, for example, one of the things that a couple museums have tried to do is, typically when you have greeters or guides or docents, um, uh, the particularly in a museum, the first thing they often want to do is begin to say, thank you for coming. This exhibit is about X, Y, and Z. What can I tell you about X, Y, and Z? But what this research would suggest is you want to step back a minute
Mm-hmm.
and say, help me understand what you were hoping to do and get out of this experience today.
Mm.
Um, and if they say, well, I was really hoping to have a wonderful time with my family, um, then I might, instead of starting to tell you about this exhibit, I might tell you about some great places you can go that are really family centered.
Mm.
Um, or if they say, well, I'm really interested in medieval armor, and they've wandered into a different gallery, then rather than start telling them about the exhibit there, you can help them get to the medieval gallery where the armor they were really looking for is. Or even more proactively, um, there was a great experiment done in the UK where um, on their website, rather than starting with where the institution was at, saying that we think what this is all about, it obviously we've got these great objects. So if you go to most websites of places like museums or galleries or archives, first of all, you see no people. You just see objects and stuff and hours. But if you think that most people are going there in part to see the stuff, um, but equally to be with other people, equally to have other kinds of experiences, then first of all, you want to feature those images on your website. So you have people doing things, people looking at stuff. And second of all, um, the story I was going to share is this um, set of museums in the UK, in the northern UK, created this whole entree experience called I like dot dot dot. And so what they did is you clicked on I like dot dot dot, and then there were literally dozens and dozens, 50, 60, 70, 100 different statements. I like history. I like adventure. I like peace and quiet. I like family activities. I like um, uh, knights in armor. It doesn't matter. They just had a zillion options. And when you clicked on that, then they showed you what museum you could go to and what experiences within that museum you could do in order to fulfill that interest. So again, it was starting from where people were at, from their needs, their expectations, their sense of well-being, rather than the institutions. I could give more examples, but
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, and I think you in some part answered the question. Uh, I think that's Robin Owen. His name is in really dark purple, and it's kind of sunny out where I am.
yeah.
He says, he or she says, how can we describe or define the set of users whose experiences we need to take into account when designing experiences and choosing the best technology? Do you have
Yeah.
anything to add in terms of what you had just kind of said? I think, I like dot 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 kind of gets to that just by asking them these kinds of
Yes,
questions
that
and sort of
that is the key. It is about trying to ask them, and the caveat there is, um, it's not as people have sometimes rebelled and thought in that what we should do as educators, as institutions, is so we need to ask people what they want and we'll do whatever they want. Well, that's not the case. I mean, if you went out in the street and you asked the average person, so what should I put in my museum? They'd look at you like you have rocks in your head. But what you want to do is say, given the um, things that we are interested in, how can we accommodate those to the needs of the users? The metaphor I like to use is good education is like building a bridge. And you don't build a bridge from one side only. You have to build a bridge from both sides. Now, historically, people who've created experiences, educational experiences, have spent disproportionate amount of time on one shore. They do all their research. They're experts on the topic. And so they want to know everything there is about armor or about creating technology. And so they invest days and months and years in being experts on the geology, as it were, of that side of the shore and start building the bridge. But they forget that the bridge is to the people who are on the other side of the shore. And you equally need to understand their needs, their capabilities, and their affordances and constraints. And then you build the bridge from both shores to the middle. And that's how bridges get built.
wow. Yes, yes. I mean, so much of what you're talking about just really resonates with a lot of the preparation and experiences. I think a lot of people in the XR industry, but really, like, you're underscoring some of these fundamental psychological, human needs and kind of wiring that we have. And I think a lot of us sort of tend to take a lot of that stuff for granted, and just what the way you're talking about it, John, just really strikes home, and for me, and I think for maybe a lot of other people too, in terms of the user experience and really going to them, finding out how your product or your immersive experience is gonna live in the way that they experience it, and then adjusting it accordingly so that it can be more successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really great. And so I know we've got another of the other questions, and we're happy to do that. But I just want to, and we're welcome to stick around for further questions, networking, maybe some photographs. But I wanted to just alert the live stream is now about to close, and to thank once again our videographers, Tony Cube Studios, and our YouTube audience. Thank you for signing in and watching the videos on the iLearn YouTube channel. So we're going to have some silence for a few seconds.